have taken a point where we've allowed the system to parent our children.
The only area of law that I wouldn't touch was domestic issues. Why? Because it's people at their worst.
But you're better off staying out of court.
Through family court, my children lost their college funds. It's going to affect their children because of the trauma that they've had to be put through 11 years of family court.
There are a lot of states right now in the United States that are introducing legislation that would provide equal shared parenting when parents divorce or separate.
You were there by their side when they, went to football, when they did all of their activities, and having absolutely no relationship with them it hurts. It really does.
I remember so many nights I would come home at like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, and I would literally just sit on the couch with my little Aaron's uniform on and just cry. Just like, where's my son? I don't know if I'll ever see him again. I don't know where he is. Will he ever know that he has a dad that loves him?
Welcome, Mike and Elizabeth McNeese, to the Anti-Alienation Project. I am so happy to have you guys here and honored to be able to interview you about your recent film, We the Parents. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So I found the film personally to be very impactful, really beautifully done in terms of the cinematography and the editing, but most importantly, it very clearly laid out the problems in family court and the problems facing parents and children after divorce and during custody disputes across the nation today. I'm dying to know, first of all, what inspired you to create this documentary?
We've both been through divorces in the past, and she and I have had very different experiences.
Okay.
She had a very amicable 50-50 outcome in her case, and I had pretty much the opposite experience, although I will asterisk it right off the bat by saying, looking back, I think my case went way better than probably what the average is in our county. I actually have a little bit more than standard time with my kids, but I just had a horrible experience. False allegations, the silver bullet. I went for over a month without any contact with my kids, and it was absolute hell living through it. And as social media started growing, and I'm doing research on trying to figure out why this is happening to me, I ended up finding that my story was not unique, and in fact, like I said, I ended up with a better case than I think is probably on the average here where we are. So, but it just felt very unfair, especially to our children who have to live in a very volatile and high conflict situation. We wanted to do something to affect change in the family court system. Video production is what we do for a living, so we decided to use our resources and talents. We wanted to give an overall look at why we have problems and maybe what some of the answers could be. And we wanted the audience to be, typical Americans, people who have probably heard of family court problems but don't really know it intimately and kind of what the issues are. So that's our background and kind of our goal. And so far, the responses that we've seen, we're thrilled with the feedback that we're getting.
That's amazing. Some people might not be familiar with my story, but my dad went through that silver bullet divorce as well, and that ended in 20 years of alienation from him. So I know intimately how false accusations and withholding the child and all these different tactics can not only affect the relationship with the child, but can really send that person on a different trajectory, negative trajectory. So I'm really glad you guys have made this film. Can you tell if you have had your intended impact?
I think it's really early to tell. We did pre-screen it for a few months before it went public on YouTube. We had a lot of private groups, a lot of organizations, attorneys, judges, all kinds of people that screened it ahead of time, legislators, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. In fact, we haven't actually gotten any direct negative feedback. The only thing we've heard so far really is people who are advocating for family court reform, who feel we didn't go far enough, who feel like we didn't go deep enough, that we didn't call out corruption hard enough. And those are valid points. But I don't consider that negative feedback. To me, that's confirmation that we're on the right track. because we weren't trying to get too far in the weeds. The film is told through the eyes of parents, and we chose to start there because there is just a general idea that if you're a good parent, you're going to have your kids, and only bad parents lose their kids. And until you've gone through it as a good parent, it's hard to believe that the system works the way it does. So we started from the parents' perspective, and the parents featured in the film, these are not crazy situation parents. I mean, these are regular parents who love their kids and just want to be part of their kids' lives. And we intentionally chose those types of parents to represent all of us and to tell the story of how this happens to good people.
So the feedback that we've gotten, like Elizabeth said, was, that we didn't hit on a lot of topics. People wanted us to focus more on child support or Title 4D or alienation specifically, false allegations, corruption. Some of those felt like niche subjects that weren't really part of our goal. Like I said, we wanted to reach out to, everyday people who don't really know the full story. So that's actually positive feedback according to, the goals that we were trying to achieve with the film.
I think that you achieved them, in my opinion. That makes a lot of sense. And that seems like a good starting point too, a foundation for people who don't really know much about it. What challenges did you face while filming We the Parents?
We actually had an interesting challenge that I didn't anticipate. And there are a few women in the film. There's not an overwhelming number of women. I feel like we told the story balanced. We do have moms who have been completely crushed in the system represented. I tell my story as a successful 50-50 story. But it's primarily men. And that wasn't actually what we set out to do. We had a real challenge getting women interested in participating for various reasons. Most of them just ghosted us, but besides that, the ones that we had a mom who actually pulled out just a few weeks before we were going to screen it. And said, you know what, I want out, take me out. No explanation whatsoever. We had some women who couldn't tell their story, or they were still in litigation and they were afraid to tell their story. So that is definitely a challenge, was trying to get a female perspective in the film.
Can I ask you something? Was it hard to find women who had been through these challenges, or was it just hard to get them to want to talk?
Yeah, there are plenty of women who've been through the system, who have had their lives completely destroyed, just like men. I would say, although mothers primarily get custody or primary custody most of the time, it is starting to shift, and it really does depend on the judge, because some judges are biased against women because of false allegations and so much conflict that some women bring. We wanted to tell the female side, and we identified a lot of women that we wanted to include, and it just didn't work out, and not for failure of trying.
Okay. Well, that's good to make clear, because every day I get comments, and I always say anyone with a pulse can alienate. So thank you for saying that. I think a lot of targeted moms out there will appreciate knowing that you tried really hard to get more women on the film. Can you share any impactful moments that you had, moments that really stuck with you throughout the filming process?
I can think of one. I'll let you think of one.
Okay.
So when we were interviewing one of the Jeff Younger, about his sons, when he was telling his story, I didn't realize until we were interviewing him that he was the stay-at-home parent. And there is a misconception that mothers are the primary parent in a marital home. And we, as a culture, have shifted away from that. Now, most families, both parents work outside of the home, and there are more and more fathers who are stay-at-home dads or who work from home and take care of the kids. But then to hear that he lost custody of his own children when he was the primary caretaker, it flies in the face of what a lot of opponents of shared parenting will say, which is that it's all about what's best for the kids and maintaining the kids normal and maintaining that primary caretaker.
Yeah.
That is absolutely not true, because we've seen time and time again, if father is a primary caretaker, he has no more of an advantage the way a mother would have in that same position.
Wow. Thank you for pointing that out. Mike, did you have any specific impactful moments?
No, I don't have anything specific, but I will share that, as we were interviewing some of these folks, it really hit home to me how much this is about their kids. It's very easy to feel disenfranchised by a, government entity, but what it really comes down to is we just want to be good parents to our kids, and it shouldn't be this much of a struggle. So there's a camaraderie and a brotherhood, or a fellowship with these folks that we were able to just, chit chat with them after we were done shooting with them. We could have sat there for hours and hours with every person that we talked to. They're just good-hearted people that want to be good parents to their kids.
I'll add one of the people we interviewed was a father, but he's also an attorney. And he didn't fare any better as an attorney who'd been practicing family law. He didn't fare any better than the average dad would fare. And that was shocking to me, because you would think as an attorney, he would know the system. And his point in the film was that the laws are what is preventing a lot of these parents from accessing their children. It's the law. It's not just understanding the system. It's not just working the system. The laws are broken and old and outdated, and they don't work in today's climate.
Speaking about laws, my favorite part of the film is where you listed really clearly, it's a graphic and half of the page is black with criminal court and the other half is yellow with family court. And it's the point in the film where you differentiate in pretty black and white terms the differences between criminal and family court. For instance, in criminal court, individuals are granted due process, the right to an attorney. Individuals are granted a right to a jury trial and the right to appeal. But in family court, as the film explains, your constitutional rights can be denied. Legal counsel is not provided. Hearings are closed to the public, and it's nearly impossible to appeal rulings. I was wondering if you could discuss any specific advocacy initiatives or action steps that you believe might make family court more just and equitable.
All states in the 90s implemented a law that basically says the courts can't discriminate based on sex. And what they thought that would do back in the 90s would level the playing field and let parents know that, hey, you're equal in this court. But really all it's done is give the court an out. Because the way that those laws are typically written, it says when both parents come in, they're on equal footing. But that does not mean under any circumstances that when they walk out, they're on equal footing. So what's happening is courts say they're not biased. They say that everybody's treated equally, and that's just not true. So I think one very basic thing we should be doing is establishing a presumption of equality, barring any crazy circumstances or extreme circumstances like evidence of abuse or domestic violence. Those would be reasons that you would not want to put a child equally with both parents. But unless there's extreme circumstances like that, the parents should understand that they are both equal and that child is going to have equal access to both parents, and both parents are going to have equal say in how that child is raised and the decisions regarding the child. So a presumption of equality, I think, to start, which is what they thought they were doing in the 90s. I want to reiterate that. They thought that's what they were doing. And they will still tell you when you go and you try to go to your lawmakers and you go to hearings about bills that have to do with equal parenting, they will say, we already have it, because they don't understand that the laws we have on the books aren't working like that. Another thing is best interest of the child standard. That was also implemented in the late 90s. And the reason they did that was because they wanted to set some criteria for the courts to think about. So these wouldn't be totally arbitrary decisions. So they came up with a list of factors for the court to consider, and they call that the best interest of the child. The problem is, it's just a list of factors. There's nothing to guide courts on what those factors mean. There's nothing to guide courts on how to weigh them or what to do with them, or is this factor more important than that factor? Like, there's no guidance on what to do with them. They just have to consider them, whatever that means. So I think defining best interest of the child, I think would also help. So like in legislation for shared parenting, typically the language we use would be, it's in the best interest of the child that parents would share equally in decision making and time with the child. So we're defining what is in the best interest of children, unless this criteria, applies.
Yes. So can we back up 1 minute? Because I have a question about what you were referring to with the presumption that both parents are equal and the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. It seems as if with the silver bullet tactic, one thing that is across the board usually happens is the protective order, and all you have to do is basically state that you feel threatened or that you have fear, and you can get a protective order, which essentially colors the judge's perception of that parent right off the bat. But what are they supposed to do? Because if they make the wrong call and don't do that protective order, they might actually be putting a child in harm's way. Do you have any thoughts on that, and how we can prevent bogus restraining orders from coloring the court's perception of the parent right off the bat?
It's fairly obvious that false allegations are a problem, and false restraining orders or protective orders are a problem. If you look at the number of protective orders that were applied for versus the percent that actually go to trial, the amount that actually goes to trial is very, very small. We talk about this in the film. We actually have recording from a prosecutor who is training other attorneys to utilize protective orders as a means for a better settlement. Has nothing to do with protecting children. It had everything to do with leveraging a better settlement, because protective orders carry criminal consequences. And if you're a law-abiding citizen who's never gotten in trouble with the law, that is terrifying.
That was the first instance I had with family court, is, a civil protection order based on, obviously an outright lie. I was supposed to have a hearing within the first 14 days or something. Well, I ended up going 34 days before we got into court. And, that whole time I wasn't allowed to see or speak to my children. And I had to stay, 500 feet away from that. So yeah, I think it's obviously devastating. And then I'll fast forward a couple years when I went back to court for a modification because I wanted more time with my kids. I was asking for equal time. A new guardian ad litem got involved. And the first thing she said to me when I sat down in her office was, "Oh, I see that you have a CPO on your record. You'll never get equal time with your kids because you have a CPO." And I was like, well, that's maybe your opinion. I think one big thing that we have written into the original bill here in Ohio is a higher evidentiary standard, which should get rid of a lot of reasons that you can provide false allegations in court, because right now the law in most states is a preponderance of the evidence standard, which means that it's one person's word versus the other person's word, and there doesn't have to be evidence. It gives the judge or the magistrate a lot of discretion.
And I would say also prosecuting perjury. That is a very shocking thing to me to know about family court, is that if you ask any attorney, they're lying on the stand, what are we going to do about it? They will tell you the only consequence for lying on the stand or lying in your discovery or in any of your communications is if the judge catches you, then it ruins your credibility. But that is entirely up to the judge on what they want to believe and then what they want to do with that information. Attorneys are flat out advising their clients to embellish situations, to flat out lie sometimes. It's completely unethical, but they can get away with it because there is no penalty for perjury. So I think prosecuting perjury would also help with the false allegations, because you're less likely to do it if there's a consequence for doing it.
Absolutely. That's why I loved Robert Garza's new law, the time taken, time back. And personally, I think we need to make that a little bit more stringent, but it's a good start. Talking about the best interest of the child, the concept of the best interest of the child seems very open to interpretation. How can the legal system ensure a consistent and fair application of this standard across diverse family situations and cultural contexts? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We have to actually define it in law. I mean, there has to be statutory guidance for courts on what to do. The fact that there's not, that's called discretion. Family court judges have more discretion than any judge in any court in the entire country. They have ultimate discretion, essentially, because the only standard they have to apply is the best interest of the child standard, which is completely undefined. So how can you get it wrong? Because there's no definition for what is best for children. So I think we define what's best for children.
And you know, what's best is in the eye of the beholder as well. We just have to take the discretion away because it's not a matter of they're abusing their discretion. They have it. That's the law.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is whether or not the best interest of the child is something that the legal system should be deciding in the first place.
I think that is a valid point. We talk about changing the law to define best interest of the child and do a favor of equal shared parenting because research shows that is what is generally best for children. So that is a research-based approach. I do think it's a valid point in our country specifically, and that sets us apart from all the other countries in the world, is that, you know, our legal system is completely built around our Constitution. And our Constitution guarantees us fundamental liberties and rights. Those are rights that cannot be taken away. When it comes to parenting, this U.S. Supreme Court has said time and again that parents have a fundamental right to the care and custody of their children, and that the state cannot come in and terminate parental rights without strict scrutiny. Now, strict scrutiny is a very specific legal term, but for all of us to understand, it's a high standard. I mean, you don't have to have a law degree to understand strict scrutiny means strict, right? And with preponderance of the evidence and with unlimited discretion, they're not applying strict scrutiny. So I do believe family courts is a complete infringement on our constitutional rights. And in fact, if you try and raise your hand in family court to your judge or your attorney and say, that's a violation of my 14th Amendment right or my First Amendment right, they will laugh at you and they will say, that's not how it works in family court.
Wow. So have you thought about any alternatives? I personally don't think that children should be viewed as property, and it seems like they kind of are in family court. You know, let's divide it up and let's make it equal, just like you would talk about your assets, for example. How can parents retain their constitutional rights in this family court environment?
I think the states are going to have to recognize case law that comes down from the Supreme Court that emphasizes that parents' rights are a fundamental right. States aren't recognizing that. They just flat out are not recognizing that. And if they can ignore the Constitution, I don't know what help we have. Got to be some legal guidance to make sure courts are actually following the laws.
Okay, somebody has sent me an article written by a so-called investigative reporter named Michael Volpe, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, who said that this, in regards to We the Parents, this movie masquerades as an in-depth look at the family court system, but is actually nothing more than propaganda for shared parenting. How would you respond to Mr. Volpe here?
Well, that's not surprising. It sounds like someone who doesn't support shared parenting views an opposing viewpoint as propaganda. That's the culture we do live in, especially with social media. Is if we don't like what we're hearing, it's propaganda. What we do in the film, though, we do lean towards and we provide research about shared parenting. The film is about children. And I think that is a point that we have to hit home. This film is not a father's rights film. This film is not a mother's rights film. This film is not about anything but the children. Even though the parents are the ones speaking, everything they say is built around their children and how the system affects our children. So the focus is what is best for children. Shared parenting is the obvious choice to start with. It's one of many things that we can do. But we started there because if the courts can't recognize that a child needs both parents equally, then all the other laws don't matter.
Yes, right.
I don't think we're offended by someone calling the film propaganda. Fine, that doesn't bother me. We have a goal in mind that we want a societal change for family court to not be a high conflict environment, and we want them to be fair, especially to kids. If you want to call that propaganda, that's fine.
I was hoping that you would answer is in something like that. In my mind, when I first heard of shared parenting, I was like, how is this not already happening? This is a no-brainer. So I was curious to ask you, why is equal shared parenting so controversial?
There's a lot of money involved. Family courts it is an industry. When you get divorced, it's not just you hiring an attorney and then there's a judge involved. There are dozens of people sometimes involved in these cases. So you file for divorce, they're going to bring in a guardian ad litem who's going to investigate and make a recommendation to the court. They're going to bring in a custody evaluator who comes in and basically looks at each parent and their parenting style and decides if they're a worthy parent, essentially. There's psych evaluations. I mean, there are so many professionals who are brought into these cases that it is a huge billion-dollar industry in this country. So when we see opponents like the Bar Association, who are typically very vocal against shared parenting legislation, and the judges associations are typically against it, there is a whole industry at stake. And they do recognize there's a problem, but they fail to recognize that they're part of the problem. It will change the way that they do their industry. One of the largest law firms in Arkansas, in Little Rock, closed its doors within a year of their shared parenting law coming into existence. Why? Because they had to change the way that they do business. Nobody wants to lose their business model or their income. So attorneys are going to be against it. Not all. We have some really good attorneys who are in favor. So we have some really good ones who are in favor. But the industry is big and there's a lot of dollars. And so collectively, they typically oppose shared parenting. They don't want to change it because there goes their clientele. Money is the biggest reason, I think, if we were really being honest with ourselves. But no one will tell you that. They'll give you all the reasons why. They typically go with extreme examples. They'll say, well, if both parents get the children equally, then children are going to go to abusers more often. But no state that has ever introduced legislation for shared parenting has ever done that without an exception, a very explicit exception in the cases of domestic violence and child abuse. The people who oppose this, it's only people who are benefiting from the current system.
Okay. That's a lot of information right there. So,
Sorry.
No, that's all very, very good information that I think probably viewers are going to be aggressively nodding their heads at while they hear you say that. So I'm just thinking, okay, the best interest of the child is, it's just fluff. It's really about the best interest of these people's pockets. If shared parenting is backed by research and honestly common sense too, that it's the best interest for the child, yet nobody wants to implement it, these people just need to find new jobs. They need to find a new way to work because no one is actually looking out for the best interest of the child. That's just my opinion. What can people do if they are wanting to become active in this fight for shared parenting or try to implement it in their state? Are there any action steps? For example, what can I do in Utah?
Join a group, write letters to the editor, be on podcasts, share podcasts, share our film. Getting the word out to everyday people is what's going to drive this, because when you create a societal change, that pressure comes from the people, and they're just going to expect change. Much like happened with gay marriage 10, 15 years ago. It was just the people overwhelmingly said, yeah, we want this to happen. And then the legislation had a responsibility to make it happen. And like Elizabeth said, we have a lot working against us because it's a powerful and profitable situation right now for the family law industry. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Can you share any plans that you might have for future projects?
What we're doing right now is we're really focusing on getting this film seen and shared with legislators, especially. A lot of times legislators hear from their constituents who are going through family court. But if you've not been through it, you kind of think that these crazy cases are the exception. And they have plenty of lobbyists at the state houses telling them that, oh, that's just the exception. That no, judges are and attorneys, we're looking out for the best interest of the children. And so they do nothing because they just don't think the problem is really pervasive. So it's very, very, very important that we use our voices and share. The film is an easy way to do it. So not everybody can make a film that just happens to be what we can do. So we did that, hoping that people will use it as a tool. So We the Parents, Texas is a group that sprung up just in the past few weeks. We don't run that group, but they're a bunch of different Texans in different organizations coming together to focus on Texas. And they're showing the film and having expert panelists talk after the film and really get in the weeds and answer questions. And all these panels so far, and as far as I know, have attorneys on them. They have their Supreme Court justice, one of their Supreme Court justices on them, judges. I mean, these are experts who are even in the field of law that are coming and talking about this. So they're using the film as a way to get people in the door to listen to these panelists discuss the issue. And so we're hoping that from those types of interactions, that real solutions come to the table, that people come up with actual ideas that they can implement and take to their state house and take up to the federal level and get things to change.
I haven't seen many fathers against shared parenting, and that tells me a lot. As a mother myself, I understand, I could put myself in the position of having to go through the tragedy of divorce and only having your kids 50% of the time. And as a mother, obviously, I would want to have my kids all of the time. But that would be looking out for my motherly best interest and not my child's best interest. I don't see many feminist groups advocating for shared parenting, but this just shows me, I think, that some people really fail to understand that children need both parents in their life equally. I said at the beginning of this episode, anyone with a pulse can alienate, and they will, and they do. But it is curious to me that online and even with people I've spoken to in real life, it's the fathers who are pushing for shared parenting because they want time with their kids. I don't see women pushing for shared parenting. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I have some really good news on that. So there is an organization called Moms for Shared Parenting, and it's led by a woman, Emma Johnson, who is a feminist. She has a ton of information and she does a lot of articles, and she's done her own research where she polled single moms. And she found that single moms who do have shared parenting are more likely to earn over $100,000 in salary. They make more money. Mm-hmm. She also found when she was polling like 2,500 single moms, the majority of them want shared parenting. So there is a lot of women who want it and who have it, but they're not advocating because they don't recognize it's a problem.
Okay.
So they're there. I'm one of them.
That's great news.
I mean, it was when I went through my divorce, we were married 15 years. We had 3 children. My youngest has special needs. I was the primary caretaker, especially when he was a baby, and he has special needs. So we spent a lot of time in the hospital, therapy, all of that. I'm the one who did all of that with him when he was little, while my husband worked. And that was just the arrangement that we had. So when we separated, not being with my kids half the time was devastating for me. And that's up to me to get the therapy and the counseling that I needed to cope with that. Because the kids, the trauma of separation is plenty. They don't need the additional trauma of, where's my other parent? Did they leave because they don't love me? I don't see them as much. They must not love me as much. And I remember telling myself that I could not live with myself if I had to look my children in the face, and 2 of them were teenagers or preteen and teenagers at the time, and tell them, I'm sorry, but you're not going to see your dad but every other weekend. I couldn't do it. Even though I didn't want them to be away from me that much, I couldn't do that. I felt like it would screw them up in the long run way worse than the trauma of the separation itself.
Thank you for mentioning that. So just to wrap it up, if you had to pick 3 or 4 most important things that you believe would help fix the family court, given that you've been through this whole process of documenting We the Parents and talking to so many parents who've been through this, what would those 3 or 4 important things be?
I think number one is societal pressure. It's not a lack of trying. I think there's just not enough pressure to overcome the power and the money that the family law industry is creating for themselves. So we the parents, have to speak up. We have to make pressure. We have to get in contact with our legislators and really pressure them and let them know that we're not going to keep voting for you guys if you're not going to help us fight for these issues. So I think that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah. I mean, I would say specifically changing the law. So I think there should be an equal presumption, a rebuttable presumption. I think strict scrutiny standards should be in there. I think that higher standard of evidence and prosecuting perjury. I think that was 4 or 5.
Much, yeah.
I think those are excellent points. Kind of surprised they already haven't been put into play. It seems like a no-brainer to me. What is the best way for people to stay up to date with your endeavors, and how can people best support you and your work, aside from sharing the film and watching the film?
Well, we're mostly doing everything on Facebook. So that's where most of our updates are.
Excellent. So on Facebook, if someone wanted to find you, should they just type in We the Parents?
Make sure you type in We the Parents movie.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for giving me some time to speak with you tonight and for your hard work over the past few years. It really means a lot to not only me, but parents and former alienated children across the world. And I hope that it goes viral. I really do. I will do my best to share, and I'm excited to see what you can accomplish in the future too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and we're glad to be on with you. And we've been big fans of what you've been doing since we found you on TikTok a while ago. So it's great to meet you and great to chat.